Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks, Mr. Bishop, for yielding the time. I appreciate the comments from my colleague from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, on this significant bill and resolution that we are talking about tonight. Now, I grew up in the corner of New Mexico that does not have Indian tribes in it, so when I was elected to Congress in 2003, I began service and started traveling into some of the Indian reservations and slowly began to develop relationships and friendships with those tribes. In 2013, one of my friends from the Laguna Pueblo called and said, we have one of our culturally significant items that is going on sale in Paris and in France, and he said, we're going to try to buy it, but we're not sure that we can bring it home. They ended up purchasing that item at the auction, and sure enough, France would not allow them to take it out of the country. So we negotiated between our State Department and the French State Department. Finally, they were allowed to bring that item out. They bought a first-class ticket for it. It was so significant they did not want to let it travel as cargo in the hold of the airplane, instead buying that first-class ticket to where it would sit there in the compartment with them. Now, that's not a culture that I was familiar with until I began to form friendships among the Native Americans, but it's a story I hear repeated. The same young man who purchased the item was going to buy the second item in that same site, and the internet access there on the Indian reservation, he was dropped off the internet, did not purchase it. It's in his explanation of the missing of that second article. He said that he and his wife had lost a child in childbirth. And he said the feeling of missing that item was exactly the same as losing the child in childbirth. Now, that is not something I necessarily can identify with, but I certainly identify with the emotions that say there are things that are so significant they should not be trafficked in. We continued our kind of unofficial visits with the auction house at that point. And they began to say that, look, many of the collectors would simply give the items back. They just don't want to be charged for things. These were sold usually in some sort of legal process. And so we had discussions, but nothing ever came of it. Well, then earlier, again, at that same point, the Hopi tribe in Arizona had articles for sale. One of them cost $130,000. They had to buy them back. Again, the French government would not help them at all. They took it to court, were simply turned down. Well, this year, then Acoma came and said, look, we've got a couple of items that are in France. They're going on auction. We contacted the French government, and they were simply resistant. So we decided, with the help of the Acoma tribe, with my friend Mr. Cole and Ms. McCullum, who has been a champion for our Native American rights, we all formed the idea of this bill and submitted it. The day we submitted the bill, the French pulled the item that was this time a shield from Acoma. They pulled it out of the auction. Negotiations are still going on to bring that item back. But the idea that we as a government, we as should be studying these things that are around the world being sold internationally, maybe have enough significance that we would want them to be repatriated. We'd want them to come back to where people would know about their heritage. Now, as I began to be familiar with the Indian culture, the U.S. government was not always gracious in its dealing with those Native American tribes. And so the least that we can do is help them reestablish that culture that lets them tell their young, the children who are coming up, about who they were, where they came from, and the things that are significant to them. When I visit on the tribes today, occasionally they will bring out canes that were given to them to indicate their sovereignty. Those were given by Abraham Lincoln. Now, it sends chill bumps up and down my spine when I'm standing on a tribal ground. They carefully bring out these canes that came from Abraham Lincoln to just signify their importance to the country. That's the value that their culture places on these items, and those items are passed around from one family to another to be in charge of the caretaking for it. So this resolution today simply says that we want to study it, we want to figure out what we can do better, and let's do better. Again, I thank my Democrat co-sponsors, and it's a very good bipartisan bill. It's a bicameral piece of legislation. Thank Chairman Goodlatte and Subcommittee Chairman Sensenbrenner and the entire Judiciary Committee staff for the work on it, but urge the passage of H-Con Res 122 and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New Mexico yields back. Gentleman from Michigan reserves. Gentlelady from Texas recognized.
I thank you. I'd like to inquire if there are any other speakers.
No. No other speakers, Mr. Speaker.
I'm prepared to close.
Gentlelady from Texas recognized.
Again, let me thank my good friend Mr. Pearce and his co-sponsors, Ms. McCollum and Mr. Cole, for their leadership. In closing, tribal cultural objects play a crucial role in ensuring that Native Americans and generations to come retain the opportunity to learn about their rich heritage. They help to connect tribal members to their history, traditions, and personal identity. The story you told, Mr. Pearce, was a moving one and evidences how important this legislation is. The theft of these objects is a direct assault against the vitality of Native American cultures, for when they are stolen or destroyed, a piece of that culture is irretrievably gone, not only for Native Americans, but for all Americans.